Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. With me today is the woman who knows how to set personal boundaries, Alex Standy. This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Are happy. We're also, this is kind of like a transition point. This is like the end of an era because I hadn't really announced it before today. I'm letting listeners know that I've been doing this podcast now 5 days a week for the past 5-6 years, something like that. And I finally gotten to the point where I'm thinking I need to get some of that time back. So starting with June 2023, I'm going to be reducing to 3 days a week. And the two shows that I am cutting are Thursday and Friday. And I've been inviting co-hosts from those shows to join me on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, because Tuesdays and Wednesdays are also a shift. Normally we've been recording at 4 p.m. Eastern time, which doesn't affect listeners. Most listeners don't really care because they don't tune into the live stream, but we care. But Tuesdays and Wednesdays are now moving to 7 p.m. Tuesdays because that's the only time Joel is available, and I love having Joel back. And Wednesdays because, well, Tuesdays are working out at that time. I'm thinking if I can do the same thing with Wednesdays, that frees up my afternoons. So like during the summer, if I want to be at the beach, I can stay at the beach. You know, if I want to be out doing something, I can stay up doing something. Don't have to rush back to do the podcast. So yeah, there's a combination of factors going into that. So obviously I reached out to my co-host doing Thursdays and Fridays, and sadly I can't match up with Alex to do a show because our schedules are no longer in alignment. Yep. So we've been doing this together for what? 5 years, something like that?
5 years.
Yeah. So this is actually the last official show with Alex on the show, which it can't be the last one permanently. It can't be the last one.
No, probably not. Probably not.
No, we can't do that. But it's the last regularly scheduled one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah. So first thing I got to tell you is thank you for all the time that you've been doing this with me. And I love you and I care about you and I appreciate you.
Walter.
It's been quite a journey. I mean, and a lot of it has been your own journey too, because you've been through so much, particularly in the last few years.
True story.
But even your story has brought value to the podcast. I mean, it's
that's true.
It is. It's amazing. It's amazing. Plus, I'm going to really miss seeing your purple hair every week. I mean, it's just
wow.
I look forward to that. That's part of the Alex image, you know.
I'll text them to you every time I change them.
Oh, okay, yeah. It's the Alex brand. That's what it is. You know? So yeah, but again, thank you so much for all the episodes you've been doing with me because I've loved every single one of them. Really.
I've loved every single one too.
Yeah. And we have a special guest joining us on a topic, actually, that probably you're going to find a lot of interest in, Alex. His name is Chris Glatis. Glatis, yes. And Chris is a filmmaker, but he's also Glatis. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I pronounce it wrong? Okay. So Chris Glatis. Chris is a filmmaker, but he also has a history of dealing with anxiety issues. And he's written a book on the topic called When Your Mind Screams, which is a good title. It's evocative. You can tell
it is.
A filmmaker wrote that title, right? You can tell.
True.
Actually, a fellow filmmaker recommended that title, and I was like, I didn't like it. And then, lo and behold,
here we are.
That's the power of groupthink, right? When you have multiple contributions to the project.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really good. So anyway, Chris, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us today from not so sunny Los Angeles, because as you were telling us before we got going, you got a lot of cloud cover going on right now. But welcome, and tell us a little bit more about how you got into this project in the first place.
Sure. Well, I feel honored to be on one of the last scheduled podcasts with Alex. So like, you know, I get the last one that's scheduled with her. So that's fantastic. And congratulations, man. That's a lot of work. 5 days a week that's a lot of podcasting and a lot of editing. And so kudos to you. And the subject matter is fantastic. Obviously you're helping people. You know, I was struggling heavily with anxiety for, I don't know, since in my late teens, like kind of like when I went into going from high school to college, it really ramped up because there was kind of like, I think there was some separation anxiety. There was all kinds of things. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. There was all kinds of various things going on in my life. And back then, there really wasn't any books that were written by individuals who struggled with anxiety. Nowadays, you have podcasts and you have self-publishing, and all these people are bringing their beautiful, heartfelt stories of struggle and pushing the boulder up the hill and accomplishments that they've had, going through their struggles. And it's, that just didn't exist back then. So a lot of the stuff that I read initially was all clinical, like it's the amygdala and this is what it does in your head. And that's all great. And having that knowledge is fantastic. But how do I navigate life? Like I can't pull out the amygdala and,
Right.
So probably pre-COVID, I would say 5-6 years ago, I went through a really dark time, and it was interesting. I don't know if you guys have ever dealt with this, but like kind of everything's going great in the outside world, but you feel like crap, or you just don't like something's missing. Like why I have all this external, but like I'm not feeling good inside. And it was really brought me to my knees. And so I started journaling, and I would journal, like I do like a 5-minute journal, or do morning pages. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way. It's like you basically write 3 8x11 just free form writing, and you don't edit anything. And it's kind of like cleaning it's like the windshield wipers of your mind every morning. And I used to do that. But I started to write this, and I started to look at what I was writing. I go, could this be a blog? Could this be like what could I do with this? Because I'd like to, what started out as a personal kind of journey turned into like, I want to help people. I want people to know that there's nothing wrong with them. They're not broken, and spoken from someone who's been through the trenches. And so that's really what inspired, I'd written screenplays for years. I was a storyteller. So I felt like it would be I thought it would be easy, and it was probably some of the hardest writing I've ever done in my life. So, so that's how it started, and that's how it came to fruition.
I love 2 points, especially that you made toward the end there. It's the hardest thing you ever did to write this stuff. And I'm certain it's because most often, I mean, anybody who writes has written from their own experience. That's just part of being a writer. But when you're writing from the harshest part of your experience, you're exposing that to the world. That's the hard part. Like, oh my God, what parts of this can I actually tell?
Yeah, I still do feel a little naked, like putting that out there. Like anyone can just get a glimpse into my life. And interesting you brought that up, or reminded me what I said, is that, when I have an interesting relationship with my wife and my creative projects. Like it's one area that we don't really connect. And I don't know if it's because some of the stuff I used to write was very dark. It was probably upsetting to her. Totally understand. But when I wrote this book, I was like, this is just my truth. This is what I've been through. And she had a strong reaction to it, like a strong, and not necessarily in a positive way. And I think that being an artist, it was a real kind of, it was like a bright light that came on saying like, even the people that are closest to you, might not enjoy what you're doing. I mean, artists butt up against this all the time, who do I show it to? Feedback coming back, and it can send you in a tailspin. And so in the end, it was that I'm trying to help people, and the one person I love the most is getting hurt. And it's it was a tough thing. I think she's shifted a little bit. But what I know is it is my truth, and it's my honest journey, and I can't really do anything. Once I put it out, I put it out. I can't really turn the knobs of the universe to go in my favor.
Right.
And so there was the putting it out there and worried about what people were going to think. And then there was also just the process of writing all this was just such a chore. It was really, I did have, a developmental editor help me, which I love. I was like, I wish they had these people for screenwriters. Like they hold your hand all the way through and tell you straight up, that's cliche. That needs to go. That doesn't work. Oh, I've heard that a million times, So, but it was hard. It was hard.
Yeah. And like you say, it's very vulnerable. That's a word that would definitely associate with it.
Yeah.
I mean, Alex, I know some of this is resonating with you. So I'm not even going to do my next question yet. I'm going to go to you. What's your take so far?
I was reacting to the fact that he said that, his wife had a strong reaction because, that's the reason when I was doing comedy that I wouldn't like rehearse my jokes with my family or close friends. I would be like, nah, y'all just going to have to pay to come see me because I don't want any feedback that's like too close to home. Cause if my feelings get hurt, now I feel that certain type of way about that person. So you got to learn how to separate. So that's why I feel like, outsourcing and using, what do they call those things when people come in and test out your product? Is it just a product tester? No.
Are you saying like, cause they do have people that test like the taste of foods and I mean, you can like.
No, I mean like people who like are about to watch a new TV show and they're like.
Oh yeah. It's like a test audience. I've been.
Yes.
Test group.
Thank you. Test group. That's
Yeah.
That's a good idea. That's
Alex, I want to ask you a question. Do you feel
Sure.
that, first off, I want to say that my wife's brilliant and she's got a lot of great ideas and I think that the question I would ask you is, it doesn't seem to me like you're worried about feedback. You want honest feedback, but you need someone to be objective and someone who is your mother, father, brother, sister, who are so close and can't see, they might not be able to be objective. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, exactly. Cause I don't feel like they're going to see me as me. They're not going to see me as a stand-up comedian. I need someone who doesn't know me to give me honest feedback. Yeah.
And people get scared. Like people, I've been on the part who's been anxious and worried about like if I read something because there's so many things that are going on there. Like for a creative, it could be like someone else is doing something you want to do. Like, right. And like, so there's a weird, like, it's usually subconscious, but there's I know I've talked to other artists too, just to get clarity, just to say, I'm not going crazy that, I asked one very prominent author and I was like, do you show stuff to your significant other? Cause I think he's married. And he wrote back in big, bold letters, absolutely not. He goes, when I am done with it and I feel happy with it, I will show it at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
And everyone's different. Some people I know, they get great feedback from their significant others. And, but it can be a very tricky territory to navigate. Yeah.
And for a number of reasons, I would think. I mean, you've identified a few of them. I wrote a fiction book, and I also edited another book, and I ran both of them by my wife. And the hardest part was getting her to give me an opinion. Just, she wasn't used to doing that. That wasn't like her field of expertise, Right. So like, well, the answers were like, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, there's the other kind of like when things kind of turn in on themselves, it's almost like writing the book was brought up. I even write about it in real time in the book. Like I'm anxious about this chapter because what I'm writing about. So the process of writing the book allowed me to work through some of my anxieties. Right. So it's because it's like every day you're showing up, you're working these same muscles. And, the only other thing I'll say is I did have my mother and my sister in there as well. And I was very, very, honest, truthful, and pretty raw about my experience growing up and how I was affected by their behaviors. And I didn't take anything, I didn't make anything up. I didn't it was just the truth. So I was a little worried about that. And ironically, my sister, who went through a very troubling period of time in her life with mental illness, and when I published the book, and she made this massive turnaround right during that time, and I'm like, oh my God, she's gonna read this stuff, and she's gonna think, because there's no kind of resolution to my sister's story in the book, and so that was very tough for me because I'm like, oh my God, she's made this massive change in her life. We're actually, with each other like brother and sister now, which is beautiful. We still have our speed bumps, but, I told her, I go, look, if I ever do another book or a revision of this book, I'm going to put in there your story, because I never thought she would come out of that tailspin, So the worry about how others that are important to you in your life are going to be affected, especially if they're in the book, like if you're talking about it.
That's true.
Yeah. And Alex, you also went through your own version of anxiety. You've been through that actually, I think, on a couple different occasions. What did this bring to your mind about that?
I probably went through the deepest of anxiety that you can go through. I went straight from being a stand-up comedian, being social, going clubbing every night, to straight up agoraphobia and just not even leaving the house, not doing anything. And it was like, it took like a month, but it was a harsh switch, to the point where like my friends were like, no, you're being dramatic, cut it out. And 10 years later, it was not dramatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's scary.
But I've come a long way. Lots of therapy, lots of medication, lots of good support system.
That's amazing. I mean, that, you have to figure out what works for you. I think that the other thing, when I wrote this book, I feel that it's probably for people who have tried other things. It's not, it might not be something someone would read straight off. They're suffering anxiety. Although I do believe anyone, like you said, you asked Alex if she's had some anxiety. I'm like, who doesn't have anxiety?
Right?
Especially after COVID, it's like, we've been boxed away. I think there's going to be a lot of PTSD coming down the road, where people are having these reverberations of COVID and not seeing people's faces and being crammed into, boxes. But, what I do try to do is simplify the process, after trial and error of a lot of failure, what really worked for me. And everyone has their own, you pick your tools, and everyone has their own way. And, I want people to be clear about that, to understand that. But it's also that I think the biggest problem is that, people don't talk about it. They're scared to, especially men. And I keep hearing that, like, oh, this book's going to be so good for men. And maybe because I'm a man and I'm speaking about it, I think I always saw it as a weakness when I was younger. I didn't talk about it, and not talking about it just exacerbated the thing that I was trying to heal. Right. And so, not being broken. And I think also, like, I don't know if you dealt with this, Alex, but there's a kind of, with anxiety sufferers, I think that there's an overcomplication of everything. And like, I think for me, when I overcomplicate things, it gives me that little hit of anxiety. Now just stay with me here. So I'm so used to anxiety, when I don't feel it, I start to feel anxiety.
Yeah.
I have to, there's sneaky ways that I'll drink a cup of coffee that I usually don't do, because it gets me edgy. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Like I still have anxiety nowadays. It's not as bad as it used to be. So you got to be very careful. The overcomplication of things, these sneaky little ways that you could exacerbate anxiety. And if you can simplify it and come up with like a handful of things that really work for you, which I cover in the book, which I think, the way I got to those things were doing a zillion things and then trying to figure out where is the overlap in all of these? Where is everyone saying so? And one of them is breath. One of them is breath work. I mean, and that sounds like a buzzword nowadays, but it is crucial, I think, as a number one step. And, but people have to find their way, and it sounds like you're doing amazing now, which is awesome. And it's just really scary. It's really scary when it first starts. You don't know where to turn.
It is. And the thing a lot of books don't talk about is that feeling of guilt that you feel when you start feeling better. When you start, so for instance, for me, having agoraphobia, me starting to go out and having fun. And it's like, I feel guilty because I couldn't put the finger on what the reason was. I just felt guilty for not being anxious. And while I was out, when it was like that for so long, such a weird feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you did you get to the bottom of that? Like
I never got to the bottom of it, but I did quiet the voice.
Okay. So you're doing something right.
Yeah. It's more like, I feel like exposure therapy is basically how I did it. So it's the more I just kept going out and realizing that I'm allowed to have fun without feeling guilty.
Yeah. And was it really guilt? Is that what you landed
on?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Interesting. It's because people experience like, the survivor's guilt, like with someone, if they're in a car crash and everyone dies except for one, they feel they should on some level, I guess, but, there's like a survivor's guilt,
it's like that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. I haven't heard of that as now when you're saying you have agoraphobia, which I've had elements of that, like being, like when I was snowboarding and I was like in this wide open space, like on a mountain, and it just got really like, I was like, yeah, there's no one here. Like, and so.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's like me when I go to the beach at night. It's too much.
Yeah. I've had a little bit of that. But I don't know if agoraphobia because it kind of gets lumped in with anxiety and all those other things. I wonder if agoraphobia has its own special kind of, reaction.
Like level.
Like you had this guilt that you dealt with. The biggest thing I got to say is you reached out for help. You got the help. That's, you have to take the first step, because I think there's a lot of people, I'm generalizing, but I think probably more men are suffering in silence. And I mean, during COVID, you see people, I mean, I had a handful of people, which is crazy to say, that I know that ended their lives during that time, during COVID. And definitely, the depression, they were probably dealing with some other things, but everyone was like, I never knew that the suffering. And so, really speaking it out to a friend, to a therapist, and just getting that ball rolling is a huge, like, relief.
Yeah. Yeah. I had people help me out. I didn't feel like I needed help. I didn't see what was happening until it was too late. And then my mom was like, no, that's not my child. We got to fix this. But now I'm all the way on the other side of it, where I'm helping the people that are having anxiety.
Oh, so that's wonderful. Pay it forward.
Yes, exactly.
Is it as rewarding as it sounds?
It is very rewarding. I just saved someone's life the other day, as a matter of fact. They were going through it. This really bad breakup, 14 years, and then boom, Dear John letter, restraining order, and they were really going through it. And I was like, I promise you, this feeling is temporary. I guarantee you're going to get through this. And then I was like, please, it's been 2 weeks. Take a shower. Yeah, I guarantee you'll feel a little bit better. Take a shower. And he took a shower, and his sister came over, and then the next day he was like, oh, I went to yoga this morning. I did this. And I couldn't get him out of bed for 2 weeks, but turned around. It was just that quick. He's like, it still sucks. I still think about her, but I threw her clothes out and I went to yoga.
That's huge.
Yeah, that's huge for this guy. Huge.
Yeah.
One I call in the book, I have a chapter called Newborn Steps. You always hear about baby steps, and to me, newborn steps is even smaller, right? Taking those tiny steps for whatever it is every day. You can use that in every area of your life, not just working on anxiety, but it adds up. It adds up over time, and I can get out of a comfort zone a little bit. I can go a little bit further and further outside of the comfort zone. And I mean, if you would have told me, I don't know, a year or two ago, but all these podcasts and talking in front of people, and this is different than memorizing something and standing on a stage, but it's still confronting. So you want to show up, and you want to be your best self, and you want to be able to transmit what you think may help.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing I'm interested in, Chris, is I mean, you guys were detailing so beautifully what it's like to be in the midst of it that's why I was happy to shut up for a while there. But now that we've covered that part, you're a filmmaker, and it seems obvious to me that this is where it's all going to go at some point. But do you see yourself creating a film or multiple films at some point that discuss this topic in some form?
It's a really good question, because if I look back, most artists can look back on their body of work. And obviously, you know, what you see out there, like I don't have a ton of credits, but I've done a ton of work. Like you know, I've got multiple things that are spinning and haven't gotten out there yet. And so it takes a lot of work showing up every day. But when you look at, when I look at my body of work and I see the common themes that come up, right? And maybe not necessarily someone who suffers from anxiety as a character, but I see a lot of those seeds in there. And to me, an anxiety attack, an agoraphobic attack is a horror show. It's like a horror movie. And
it's a living night terror.
Yeah. I tend to lean towards psychological thrillers, horror, not like the smart horror that's come out recently, not the jump scare stuff. I'm not interested in that, but like the really kind of grounded, smart horror, because those things are so, ingrained in me and what I dealt with. And when you think you're going to die on a regular basis, that's going to come out in your work. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. To answer your question more specifically, I think that, can I put like someone who suffers from anxiety or, into a different sort of package creatively? I'd love to do that. You know, I don't know what exactly that looks like. I did have a couple of ideas where, you know, I saw like, and I do write about this in the book, where people with mental illness, what if we did a reframe and said, maybe they have a superpower and not an illness. Maybe they're so in touch with nature and humans that it's overload and they can't hold that, and it causes visions. There's a brilliant movie called Crazy Wise. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it was done. It was a documentary done about how mental illness is treated throughout the world. And the U.S. is really the only place that I think they're getting better, but there's a real stigma around it. There's a real let's perpetuate this by getting people. I want to be careful how I say this. I do think medications are amazing for some people, and I saw that in my sister. I think that if you're not doing any work underneath, when you come off medications, it's all just going to come roaring back. That happened to me.
Right.
But I think there is a little bit of a they want to perpetuate, like, want people on medication, you know, you're broken, take this pill. And that doesn't happen over in other areas. In other areas of the world, like some of these tribes, I think it was, I could be wrong, but I think it might have been in Africa, where the way they treated mental illness was like, they put these people up on a pedestal. They're like, they can see things we don't see. So getting back to your question, could I incorporate some sort of sufferer that actually sees himself as someone who has a superpower, and how that superpower, you know, how he can use that to help others, you know, like almost like a Batman, but coming in and, like, you know, helping people, with their emotional states, you know. So it's very early, you know, just kind of rolling around my head. But, yeah, I think I do want to incorporate more of that. And as my wife would say, more heart into it as well. Because I think that I had a lot of anger about suffering. I had a lot of anger about the people that weren't there for me. My parents weren't there for me emotionally. That anger and velocity that came out of me into my work was intense, you know? So.
It makes total sense to me that it would actually come out one way or another. So I really was expecting an answer that would suggest that. I was just kind of curious to know how it was coming out. And you gave us a beautiful, detailed answer on that. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Something else you touched upon cued another question in my mind. You mentioned a couple times your sister, and both you and she have gone through issues related to mental health and so forth. I'm going to guess there may be others in the family going through similar stuff. I'm curious to know what your take is on this. There are a couple schools of thought about how situations like this can show up in multiple people. One is, you can kind of generically describe it as the environmental approach, that, you have people in the same environment, they're going to have similar kinds of responses. So that would account for, say, family members having a similar kind of thing. And you mentioned your parents, so perhaps your parents having a similar kind of impact on each of the children. But there's also another viewpoint that I'll label as the epigenetic viewpoint, for lack of a better term. I'm not sure it's a totally accurate description, but I'll just describe it that way. And it would be where these kinds of phenomena show up in multiple people in ways that we can't easily pin down, but it's apparent there's some sort of connection going on. And the epigenetic idea is epigenetic goes beyond genetics. It goes beyond DNA. And it's kind of a theory that is in the process of evolving right now to suggest that, while there are certain things that go on with humans that we cannot pin down to a genetic structure, we can notice that there seems to be sort of a transmission going on between humans that we can't quite figure out how it's getting from human A to human B. That's what I mean by the epigenetic side of it. Mm-hmm. You can look at it, scientists have looked at it in terms of, different species of monkeys, for instance, who are able to, different clans of monkeys in different parts of the planet having the same kind of experience at the same time on a very similar kind of trigger. And it can even be on the same trigger, a trigger happening in one part of the world that affects a monkey or in the other part of the world, that kind of thing. So there's lots of studies along that line. I'm curious to know, this is a broad setup, obviously, but I'm kind of curious to know, do you have any sense from your own experience that you might have had something that goes beyond the environmental similarity with other people? I mean, you described how your sister had stuff going on, so I can certainly see that as being an environmental similarity going on. But have you also noticed other kinds of connections that you can't really easily pin down to, well, we have the same parents or the same school or we have the same influences? Have you seen that?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes to that nurture nature conversation. Mm-hmm. I think you also mentioned something that was almost like the butterfly effect,
Yeah.
Where you, for my own, I'll start with my own experience. For my own experience, what I've noticed is, man, was I in denial, mm-hmm. of my upbringing. And, looking at, like, just going through what I've been through, even, nowadays, I mean, another thing I say in the book is that I don't think it 100% goes away. I mean, I think you hear people say, yeah, one day it just, all of a sudden the anxiety was gone. I think that's more of a rarity than that happened. That it's not, I don't think it's that common. Again, that's just my experience. But I really realized that, the trauma that I went through, which is developmental, which is really the earliest stage, that's like, 0 to 4. Mm. So, I think that my mom was clinically depressed. She was an alcoholic. Those things didn't really come full force until I was a little bit older. But if I was in her womb and she was dealing with these feelings and sensations and, going on in her body that was passed on to her, she had a mother who was really, brutal towards her father, my grandfather. And so internalizing this stuff, like we all do, we hold, that book, The Body Keeps the Score. I don't know if you've heard about it, because I did trauma. Mm-hmm. Trauma is now becoming also a big buzzword because, for many reasons, but I think that, and trauma can be sexual abuse, like overt sexual abuse, physical abuse, horrible abuse, but it could also be a simple look that your mother gave you when you were younger that every time you see that look, you're back in your little kid, And so when I started to look into how these things are passed on and, trauma from, they say 7 generations, I think it lasts, 6 or 7 generations, it can be passed along, this,
Oh, wow.
This more environmental kind of, situation where it's which I think would be nurture, So that was a real eye opener. And now realizing that I did years of therapy, but I felt like when I did the therapy, a lot of it was from here up. I didn't. I felt disconnected from my body. But when I do these sessions now, I'm like, holy S, like feeling how when I really tune into my body, feel how like tight my chest is or whatever. And the issues are in the tissues. I mean, that's another thing that people say. So I'm a true believer of that. Now, with that said, I think there's also genetic. I think there's the way we are wired also has a big impact. Like my sister, she was very outspoken when she was younger. She had the straight A's, perfectionist, where I was kind of like partying and having fun. And then we went like this, like she went into drugs and mental illness, and I kind of became the high achiever and, want to do this and be a filmmaker and all these different things, businessman. And so we had the same environment. She was a little older than me, but we had the same environment, and we have similar issues, but we also have very different ones, So it's a tough one. I think it's a little of both, and everyone's different too. I mean, I think everyone is different. But I'm a really firm believer of developmental trauma. And then I think you might have been alluding to, there is this, generational stuff that's kind of osmosed through the years. That's why you hear like my grandfather, my father was an alcoholic, my grandfather was an alcoholic. It just goes, and I can tell, and Alex, we stood up and said, this is going to end with us. I don't have kids. I think one of the reasons why I got furry kids, but one of the reasons why I don't think me and my wife had kids is because, my wife has her, stuff as well. And it was like, we were almost worried, like to pass this stuff on,
Oh, same.
Just subconsciously and not knowing. And, I'm already so like, again, a perfectionist. So like to be like every second worried about like my kid, like that's not going to have a good effect on them as well. It's almost like an anxious thing, So I don't know if that answers your question, but I believe there's all sorts of stuff that's, there's a collective trauma that happened during COVID, right? Like it's all that energy, like was just of people. I think people realized a lot of stuff about themselves that they didn't know during COVID, right? And some people probably were like, oh, like I'm actually an alcoholic. I didn't realize that until I was boxed in a house and I'm drinking a bottle of wine every night. So that collective trauma too, I think, permeates and can be insidious. So that was a long way to get there, but.
Okay. No, that was fine. That's why I like the open-ended question, because it leads to all kinds of interesting open-ended answers. That's one of my favorite things. So another question that I want to follow up with, I think a large portion of what, you were trying to do with your book was to share what had succeeded for you with others so that they could have the same benefit. That's a very common thing. People go through trauma and then they want to, they figured out what worked for them. And they want to share it with the world. It's like, oh God, other people got to know about this. And that's fabulous. That's a terrific thing. I'm also curious to know though, to what degree do you believe that your own growth is what got you through to the point where you were no longer as much affected by the stuff that was bothering you before?
Are you asking if it like the growth over all these years? Just repeat that again.
Just to what degree do you believe that the growing that you have done has had sort of an inverse impact on the anxieties you were experiencing? Because I get the very strong impression that it's true for you. It's almost always true for every story that I hear here on the show, that the more that someone develops their own ability to identify their own issues, work through their issues, get past them, develop their skill sets, find their superpowers, all that kind of stuff, the degree to which they do that is inversely related to the power of the thing that they're trying to overcome. So as they get stronger, the power of the thing they're trying to overcome gets weaker. And weakens.
Yeah, no, I totally believe that. I mean, I think that writing the book in itself, I try to frame my, what is my metric of success for the book? Well, I can say New York Times bestseller, that's probably going to end up in disappointment, at least, initially, right? But I can say that writing the book was the success, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
and in the process of writing the book, getting all my stuff out on paper, having some sort of like catharsis in that process, was huge. I think when I put it out, I felt naked, but now I feel I'm starting to get whispers like, oh my God, I didn't know that you struggle with that. I have this, or I struggle with this. There's like this dialogue that all of a sudden happened. And I think that, the one thing, so yes, I agree with what you're saying. And what I will also say is that I think that it's still there waiting to challenge me though. Like if I don't, that's for me. If I take my eye off the ball or my eye off my body, it'll challenge me and say to me, just wanted to see if you still have this thing covered, And so, and I also talk about this thing in the book called the back end of the spiral. And I think in life, like if you're looking at a staircase, as we grow and as we get older, we're kind of going up this staircase, right? But on one side of the staircase is, let's just say this is joy on one side, and let's say this is deep, deep pain over here. So you're going up, joy, pain, okay? You're like, I just took 10 steps back. Like, what's going on? Like, I thought I dealt with this. Why am I feeling this? All this stuff. But what you don't realize is you're not down here. You're up here. There's no way to go back to where you were. So as you feel more joy, you're going to feel more pain. So those things are definitely connected, right? Your ability to feel deep, deep pain allows you to feel tremendous joy. Sure. And so that spiral is, someone mentioned that to me and I was like, wow, that's so great. Cause people usually say one step forward, two steps back. But sometimes with anxiety, at least for me, you feel like you're back at the beginning, you're at ground zero, and you're not. There's no way you can be that way. So I think the book, I think continuing, some sort of, daily practice I have that I think is important for everyone, whether it's 5 minutes or 2 hours. As Alex mentioned, therapy is amazing. For me, it was up to a point because I got to a point where I felt like I was using it as a crutch. Like I was just going in there saying the same thing over and over again, and kind of like almost like cementing it, instead of moving through it. So all those things have helped, the growth and to lessen the anxiety. And I think as I'm going through these moments where I'm trying to feel more joy and feel more pleasure, there's going to be the other side of that. If I want that, I'm going to have that as well, right? I'm going to have the uncomfortable feelings. And that's a big tenet of the book is that, I don't know how, like when you went through therapy, Alex, if like what type of therapy you did, but it's like the leaning into these uncomfortable feelings. I think I'm trying to remember the sentence I wrote. It was the ability to sit, feel, and dance with the most uncomfortable feelings in your body. If you can do that on a regular basis and not in a way, you don't want to re-traumatize yourself. Obviously, right. There's times where you have to back out, but there's times when you need to push forward, right? And pushing forward is going to take you to the next book. It's going to make you grow. So there's all those kind of things that are, I'm trying to keep all those plates spinning and making sure that, one other thing I'll say is that it's a big one for me is being kind to myself. It's so hard. It's so hard for me. because I'll be like, oh, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. Like it's just ticker tape running in my head, just beating myself up. And that creates anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
It creates a lot of anxiety. So compassion and self-love are really important.
Alex has got a very thoughtful look on her face, so I'm going to follow up with her.
Do I?
You do. You really do. Yeah.
Or she's just bored.
Well, maybe that's the answer. We'll find out in a moment. I mean, I'm not going to project what the answer is. I just put the question out there. It's up to her how she's going to answer it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when he was talking about how therapy only helped to a certain point, did you find the same thing?
I found the same thing, but I also found that I have to switch therapists because they can only take you so far. They can only take you to their level of expertise. So sometimes you got to go see a different specialist or a different therapist.
Okay. All right.
Very important. And I think that just like a therapist, like a personal trainer, all these, if they're really good, they're losing clients.
Right. They get you where you need to go. And then it's up to you after that. So
yeah,
you gotta alternate.
Yeah, that's amazing. And sometimes some of them have specialties, right? Like I'm sure you're working with someone who deals with phobias and there's anxiety, a lot of it's CBT based, or EBT is now coming online a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the stuff I talk about in the book is that, but I get into some more esoteric things as well. When I told myself or someone told me, hey man, just sit with those feelings and they'll ebb and flow like a wave. Like it'll get to a point where you feel it's so uncomfortable, but then it breaks, and it took me a long time to buy into that because it's so uncomfortable, You know
how you get through that?
How do you get through that?
Remind yourself when you're in that emotional state that sometimes self-care is crying through it. Yeah. And you gotta do it to grow. So.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. And again, there's that line, there's that, I might need to reach out to someone, or I might need someone to guide me through a process, or, a therapist, and I think, and you can set boundaries with your therapist too. You can say, look, this is what I'm looking at. I don't want to, again, I think for me, it was like the talking and talking just got a little bit old for me. And I was like, I need to, cause it kept me external for me. I needed to go more internal and figure out what was going on in here,
One of the most interesting things that I discovered along the way, and I'm curious to see if you've had a similar experience, is that when I first really decided to do what you described, sitting down and just allowing myself to feel that negative feeling or whatever it might be, I was advised at one point to keep feeling it until I didn't feel it anymore. And when they said that to me, I thought that was crazy. Why would I want to do that? That could last years. But what surprised me was that the first time I finally dared myself to actually do that, I was amazed at how quickly I did get to the end of that. Like the feeling stopped. Like, what? Wait a minute. How is that possible? And not only did it stop, it stopped in a matter of minutes. It wasn't hours, days, weeks, or months. It was minutes. And when I allowed myself to do that, whatever the thing I was dealing with at that point, whatever the emotion was, whatever the circumstance was, became much lighter, much faster, just because I allowed it to go all the way through instead of giving myself, most of the way through, but not finishing it. So thereby giving myself more material to start spinning it up my head and awfulizing it and turning it into something else I can latch on to. Have you had something similar to that?
Alex, did you want to speak to that first?
You first.
Okay. I need to get Walt. I need to call Walt when I'm feeling this way, man.
That's what I
do. He's got it down. Everything you said, yes. I wrote about an experience in the book about sitting in this office, and I was feeling so much anxiety. I don't know if you've ever gotten to the point where you just I just want to be out of this body. Like I just don't want to be in this body. And that's, again, trauma response. What I did when I was younger is I did do that. Like it was a good thing to be able to disassociate because it protected me in some way, right? But as an adult, not so good. And so wonderful woman that I'm friends with, I talked to her. She's done a lot of work on herself, and she walked me through this kind of just sitting with it. And I sat in this chair over there, and I just started doing some breath work. And lo and behold, like, I don't know, it was probably about 10, 15 minutes in, because I was like, I can't sit with this any longer. It was like, it just literally just evaporated, and I went into like joy. Like I literally I did a 180-degree turn. And like I said before, I could only sit with that for so long because I was like, why is this happening? I know I don't feel joy like this, like that quick, and started to feel anxiety about it. And then I quashed joy. I think I might have just got up at some point. I'm like, like this is feeling too good. I better get up or whatever. So there is, I think, science can tell us that feelings and emotions would only last 30 seconds to, I'm probably bastard. I don't know who said this, but I know that I've heard it, and it's a scientific, fact, is that emotions and feelings, if we didn't go into our head and start to analyze what those things were and why they were there and yada, 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 they would be gone in like 30 seconds, like a minute. It's us. Why is this happening? And getting on that train that keeps it alive. Right. And so it's, I've been really noticing this with myself, is that if I'm stressed or whatever, how I'll either talk a lot or, hopefully not doing it on this show, but, or
well, that's part of being on the show. You're supposed to talk a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Or too much. I'll tend to run to the head because I'm running to the head to try to figure out how to fix it, right? Instead of staying in the body, feeling that uncomfortable feeling. And what you did is you literally, it sounds like you released something that was in your system that was causing this pain, because like you said, when it's happened since, it's not as bad. And that's the whole thing. If we can release it in our body, then we won't probably have those feelings or mind chatter anymore. And I didn't write a lot about, I wrote about my trauma, a couple experiences in my book, but I feel like getting the knowledge first and having some kind of CBT-ish tools, I think that's jumping into the deep pond, and some people can do that, but I think some people will be like, I need to talk about this. Why I'm sitting here waiting for something to happen. I like to, when I sit there in my sessions, it's like, just like waiting for an answer, like that's just going to come from somewhere. Like that's not the way I operate. Like I want to know now. I want bullet points. I want so it was very tough for me to kind of navigate that sort of therapy, at least initially. But that's amazing that you are aware of it when it happened. A lot of people might have that and they're not even plugged into what actually just happened.
I think the only reason I was aware of it was because I was advised to do it.
Right.
So if you're advised to do it, you're going to pay attention to it because that's what you're doing, right? I'm here now to do this thing that my friend recommended to me, and so I'm doing this thing my friend recommended to me, and then I think for me the biggest surprise was when I finally noticed that I finally noticed. And what I mean by that is, if you're going through experiencing an emotion, positive, negative, whatever it is, when the emotion finally subsides and stops, it's almost like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, yeah, okay, well, it's going to come back any moment now. And as long as you're not, like you said, going into the head, I thought you described that beautifully. As long as you're just sitting there waiting for the feeling and it doesn't come back, it's like you're astonished. Like, well, where did it go? That was really strong a moment ago. That was like overwhelming me, and it's gone. What happened to it?
Right.
And I think that's actually kind of what breaks the cycle. Because when you're astonished by what happened, all of a sudden your experience with it has just changed. When your experience changes, obviously you're rewiring the neural pathways is what you're really doing.
Right.
but you don't realize you're doing it. All you know is that was weird. What was that?
Yeah. And, we haven't talked a lot about law of attraction today, but it's my understanding that when you are in those high states of emotion, whether it is pain or joy, whatever you're telling yourself in those moments gets plugged in, like it gets stronger.
Yep.
Right.
So we're feeling like crap. We're talking a bunch of crap, and we're just putting that further and further into our system.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, that's the inverse side of it. Whereas
right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Whereas if I don't do that and I just kind of let it play itself out, that's when it becomes astonishing. Because I'm used to the one you just described. That's the one I do all the time. That's familiar. That's like every day. Like, hey, what's the big deal? Give me another cup of coffee. I'm already on that one. Right. But when you get the different result, because you let it play itself out, it's almost like it's a gentle shock to the system. Because it's a different result.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, it's I think the common theme we've been talking about a lot is, this, how the mind just is not like, that was so hard, like for me to grasp, because since that was a place that I went to all the time for advice or, whatever, like if you can't trust my mind, then what am I going to trust? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's almost like the gut, the mind, like, what am I going to trust? Like, if I have an unreliable narrator here, it's a very scary feeling. I mean, 90% of the thoughts that go through your head aren't true. I mean, now that's very relieving to know, because I can do the Byron Katie exercise or whatever and say, is this true? And then the next thing is, do you really know this is true? And usually that second question is a no, And so, how the mind can how it really can wreak havoc, and it can do amazing things, but you need to know when does it need to be on and when does it need to be off,
I think it's something else that comes out of what I was describing a moment ago, because when you engage in that behavior of just letting it play it out and you don't judge it, you don't do anything, you just let it play until it's done, you end up not only reprogramming your mind to start thinking about things differently and experience things differently, but you also end up reprogramming your mind with different levels of expectation. So whereas before you had the expectation that your mind was going to be out of control, today my mind is that my expectation is that my mind is going to be well within control and I won't have to do anything to do it. That's a very, very different expectation, and it has, for the reasons you gave, law of attraction and otherwise, it has very different results that come out of it.
And you sat with it, you saw the completion. You're like, if I did that once, I can do it again with any other emotion that comes up that's too intense for me. You prove to yourself that you could do it, and then that just piggybacks.
Exactly. Yeah. And the more that you piggyback it, the more that it becomes the norm. That's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to create a new norm for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And once you do create that new norm, there's a tremendous amount of peace that comes with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. This has been great. This has been a really good conversation. We need to get a couple pieces of information from you, Chris, before we part company.
Sure.
First and foremost, somebody who wants to find the book. The book is called When Your Mind Screams. I presume that's where is that found? Where do they find the book?
You can find it everywhere. I mean, everywhere where books are sold.
Okay.
But I mean, I think that all the biggies, Barnes and Noble. I think actually you can probably get you can go to an actual Barnes and Noble. But the easy ones are Amazon, Barnes and Noble online. I think iBooks or Apple Books, and you can also, if you go to my website, ChristopherGlatis.com, it'll funnel you into all those places. I think the book, I think it sends you right to Amazon. Amazon's really the easiest one. And anything that I'm going to be doing will be coming up on my website. And, yeah. And then also, I think all my social media, I'm just getting into that now. Like, it's something that I was like, no, I don't want to do social media. I felt like it was a little bit of a time suck, but I'm trying to find how it works organically for me. So I obviously have, Instagram, Twitter, and all those. They can find those from my main website.
And do you look for people to, maybe not look for, are you open to people reaching out to you and connecting with you personally to share ideas and learn things and stories and all that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a little form on the website where they can reach out with anything. We talk about anxiety, talk about films, anything.
All right. Very good. Well, excellent stuff. One thing I do want to tell to you that I always tell to guests who come onto the show, because anyone who does this, you're out there to give. You're trying to give other people what you learn for yourself, and many times you're giving in the form of stuff that you do on a podcast, or you write a post on your blog, or whatever it might be. You're putting all this information out there, and there are many people who consume it who you never see, you never hear, you never know about them. Sometimes you do, most of the time you don't. I think it's important to recognize that. So on behalf of those people you've never met and that you've never seen, thank you for what you've been putting out there. And what you continue to do is making a difference in this world in that way. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much. I mean, really, the book was twofold. It was a cathartic for me, as also to help people. And I think it's just, if I could, one thing I would say is that it doesn't, those key things that I said early on, like you're not alone. It's actually very normal. You're a sensitive human being. And there are tools and very simple things you can do to regulate your emotions, your anxiety very quickly. And don't be afraid to talk about it. I mean, that's keeping it bottled up creates anxiety. So I'm talking to myself when I say that.
Not to mention a few hundred other people at the same time. So yeah, good stuff.
Right.
And then finally, thank you, Alex, because you've been helping so many people in so many different ways here on the show for all these years. And
thanks.
You have been making your contribution to people you've never met, you've never seen. So thank you for that. And thank you for all this great time. I can't wait for the next time we get to have you back on the show.
I know, right?
Yeah, gonna be good stuff. So thank you much. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.